So this video concludes our series on how we study economics using the scientific method. So in the previous video, I said that we need good models and good data. There are certainly bad economists who abuse theory and try to force the data to fit their theory instead of using the data to test their theory. And what I'd like to do in this video is give you some examples of how that's done, one example of who does it, as well as thinking about how not to do that and how to conduct good economic research or determine what research is good and worth listening to and what isn't. Okay, so I think that understanding the difference between trustworthy and untrustworthy research, between economic claims made in good faith versus bad faith, is extremely important to know, because in the professional world, you may be taken advantage of by bad actors, by bosses or coworkers with ulterior motives, who may find a research presentation, a research paper, which supports something that they already believe and they want you to believe. And if you don't come at that article or that presentation with skepticism and with an appreciation that people can take advantage of the scientific method, then you may be taking advantage of yourself, and that's the last thing that we all want. So I think also understanding the difference between good research and bad research is important to make the world a better place, because even policy proposals or suggestions from research with goals which you support may be inefficient. And by this I mean there is good research and there is bad research which reach the same conclusion. For example, that we should cut carbon emissions to fight climate change. However, if the bad research is suggesting the wrong time frame or the wrong price or the wrong mechanism for doing so, then even though you agree with the outcome, you agree that we should fight climate change by cutting carbon, that it may be inefficient and once again come too little too late or come too costly at a particular moment in time. And so it's important that we look at good research. And in this class, you are going to read about certain findings in economics while you are working on various assignments in this class, particularly the final presentation during the last week of class, as well as your final paper. And you will need to know which findings are trustworthy and which ones are untrustworthy for you to properly defend and explain your question and your paper. So I think this is an important topic. Okay, so on the previous slide, I said that there are bad actors, people who are going to take advantage of the scientific method to find a model or research which will fit their preconceived notions rather than testing a hypothesis with a model and data. So this is what economist Alan Binder refers to as the lamppost theory of economics. He says that good economists use models to better understand reality, just as we should use lampposts to better see where we are walking. But bad economists, and mostly politicians, use simple models in economics to support whatever position they already believe. Just as a drunk doesn't use a lamppost to see where they're going, but uses the lamppost as support to keep from falling down. Now, one example of this, or what I would think would be one example, is the economics department at Florida State University. So we would all like to believe that professors are unbiased and that their research is only interested in the truth. But there are certainly economists out there with political leanings in all directions that fit the lamppost theory of economics. So if you remember the Koch brothers, K-O-C-H, Koch, their organization, which was famous for strongly opposing higher taxes and government spending for anything other than essential public goods has veto power for any economist hired at Florida State University. It would seem likely then that they would oppose the hiring of economists which don't support the theory of economics which they believe, which is basically free trade, government hands-off, lower taxes economics. And there are certainly cases where taxes are inefficient and should be avoided, but believing that they're always wrong is essentially being it's too dogmatic, that you're going to reach bad conclusions if you do that. And so trying to fit every piece of economic research into that model or that framework is going to be acting in bad faith. So finally, just because it's hard to separate correlations such as height and weight from causations like age and hair loss, that doesn't mean that it's impossible to do so. So economists use a wide variety of methods to distinguish causation from correlation, most of which are more complicated than we have time to discuss in this class. But on the following couple slides, I want to discuss one of these methods. So an improvement upon simple regression analysis can be made by using difference in differences estimation. Let's think of an example here. So let's think of a question that we may have and data that we could use to understand it. So for example, did raising the drinking age from age 18 to age 21 decrease alcohol-related fatalities? So if we were to use a simple regression analysis, then we could compare alcohol-related deaths before and after a state changed their legal drinking age. However, there may be other reasons why alcohol-related death rates may be changing at this time. Maybe there was a national law on alcohol advertising which decreased alcohol consumption for all age groups. This would change the death rates in addition to the new law. We then need to consider another difference to control for this effect. So not only before and after, but we could compare the death rate in one state which changed the legal drinking age to the death rate in another state which did not. And so looking at this graph, we can see basically how that would operate. We could see that if both states were increasing their deaths at the same rate, or in this case, hopefully decreasing, but they were both growing at the same rate, and then we know when a policy was enacted, then if the other state was basically continued growing at the same rate and the state in question changed, then we know that this is probably a causal effect and not simply a correlation with the policy. So this means that we then have two differences: alcohol-related deaths before and after the change in the drinking age, and alcohol-related deaths in and out of the state in which the changed laws were made. When we consider both differences, we can learn more than a simple correlation. We can learn whether the law caused a decrease in death rates. If we know what variable caused a change in another variable, then we can try to decrease one variable. So alcohol-related deaths by changing another variable, such as the legal drinking age. We can then save lives with policy which is informed by both good models and good data. The earliest example of this method of difference in difference estimation was actually made by an epidemiologist named John Snow, funny enough. So he was studying cholera in 1800s London and actually came up with a map like this one in front of you. And he compared cases across two differences: which water company was used to supply water and when the water was supplied. So using these two differences and knowing that the originally both companies gathered their water from the same source, but later gathered their water from different sources, Snow was able to determine that the contaminated water caused cholera. So understanding this relationship allowed policymakers to fight the epidemic. So understand that correlation does not always equal causation, but by including a few more variables, we can predict causation, which is going to allow us to have more efficient policies and save lives. And this is an interesting example in this time specifically because in the response to the coronavirus, there's been a lot of economists talking about epidemiological issues and a lot of epidemiologists talking about economics. And both groups have important insights to provide, and we can actually learn from the methods of each other. So we're not quite as siloed in academia as we necessarily are labeled to be, but the best research is going to be interdisciplinary, which hopefully you appreciate as well coming to a liberal arts college. So this wraps up our set of videos on how we study economics. In summary, we use a scientific method which requires both data and models. We may stumble across the right answer without using the scientific method through trial and error, but it will take us longer and profits will be lost in the meantime and people will die because we didn't get there fast enough. If we only rely on models, the models may be misleading or not appropriate for a given situation. If we only rely on data, we can never be positive about the generalizability or external validity of the data for the sample we collected for the whole population, which we may be concerned about. Even if we use both data and models and we employ the scientific method, we need to use the best methods possible to determine what is causal and not what is a correlation, and not just use economics as a lamppost and actually use it as a way to improve the world. So I know this is almost a whole class on how we study economics, but I think it's going to be important for how you think about this discipline throughout the remainder of the term in your education here at Kalamazoo College. So in the next set of videos, we'll discuss something different, but thanks for your attention through this whole first class of asynchronous learning.